Hello and welcome to the Inns of Court Armoured Car Regiment channel. Today we're going to be covering the Squadron Organisation from June the 28th till July the 4th, 1944. Now this is probably of interest, I guess you say, to tabletop wargamers and people who are interested in the history of the regiment, as there's obviously very fragmented history, or very difficult to get hold of history when it comes to this regiment. At least that's my personal experience. Now, this does cover a very short time period, literally a matter of days, just over a week, I think. And the reason being is, on the 6th of June 1944, half of C Squadron landed in the second wave of D-Day on Juno Beach, and their mission was to race inland and capture or even blow up some bridges in order to stop any German counterattack. Unfortunately, the mission was unsuccessful, and it's very well documented by Mark Felton's War Stories. I think I'll tag his video or card it top right if you are interested in that. Now, the rest of the regiment stayed back in England and only transferred or started to transfer to Normandy from June the 28th, arriving in Normandy. And then the whole regiment was then reunified, I guess you could say. However, by July the 4th, based on the lessons learned by C Squadron that had been present in Normandy, they made changes to the regiment's squadrons in order to adapt to the orography, the topography, and the kind of engagements that the squadron was having to tackle at that period. Now, the squadrons are reorganised a couple of other times throughout the war. Now, this presentation, I guess you could say, covers what's probably widely known as the Inns of Court Regiment's Squadron Organisation. Some of the information that's been used for this version of the presentation, or this part of the presentation, is very, very common, very easy to get hold of. The reason being is it's mostly based off of the generic Armoured Car Regiment Organisation chart, which was the organisation chart that every Armoured Car Regiment went into the Northwest European Theatre organised as. Now, this organisation chart was built or designed following experiences learned from training exercises that took place in Britain from 1941 to 1943, which the Inns of Court also partook in. However, like most things, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and that's very true. So for the Inns of Court, the lessons learned by C Squadron were very valuable and did lead to reorganising. Now, the reason why it's worth going through this, I think, is because it allows us to understand what numbers of vehicles were allotted to the regiment, what they had, and then how they then went about reorganising it. Because unfortunately, armoured cars were a finite object. You couldn't just multiply them. You couldn't just write to the War Department and say, I'd like another 24 Daimler Dingo scout cars. So the squadrons kind of had to adapt to what they had. Some of those adaptations you can see on screen now, the sawn off Daimler armoured car, where they basically removed the turret from a Daimler armoured car and removed the front mudguards in order to make it more of a scout car. As well, we'll explain why that happens later on. But I think it's worth knowing where the regiment comes from, and then that way we can piece together the story of the reorganisations and what happened, where the vehicles came from and things like that as we go through those reorganisations. But starting from a high level view, the regiment. So the regiment obviously had its own regiment headquarters. Then it had another headquarters squadron, which had a headquarters troop, an intercom troop, an admin troop, and an AA troop. And then there were 4 Sabre squadrons. So these squadrons were A Squadron, B Squadron, C Squadron, and D Squadron. And these squadrons were the ones that did the reaching out, the main work, I guess you could say. Now, each Sabre squadron consisted of a squadron headquarters, an admin troop, a support blitz troop, a heavy matador troop, and 5 Sabre troops. Now, the terms blitz and matador are the terms that the Inns of Court Regiment used to describe, I guess you could say, these troops. So you may become familiar with those terms as this channel progresses, I guess you could say. Now, each of the Sabre troops, now these really were the tip of the spear. They were the actual troops, I guess you could say, that reached out and were trying to find those kinks in the enemy's armour, trying to push forward, do the reconnaissance, capture bridges, find out what bridges were destroyed and things like that. Now, each Sabre troop consisted of 2 Daimler Dingo scout cars and 2 Daimler armoured cars. Now, for the rest of this, I'm going to just call the Daimler Dingo scout cars Dingoes, because although it's not much, it wasn't a common term at the time, I guess you could say, it's definitely the more common term that we're used to nowadays. And also, it means I'm not saying Daimler too many times and I don't trip over my own words. Now, so there would have been 5 of these Sabre troops. Then there's the heavy troop, which has 1 Dingo and 2 AEC Matador armoured cars, AEC Mark IIIs. Now, notice the caveat on the number of AEC Mark IIIs. We'll cover that at the end, I guess you could say. And what I'm probably going to do, again, for these, I'm just going to call them Matadors. That's what the term, well, that's the term, I should say, that the Inns of Court used for these armoured cars, and it's quite common for them, I guess you could say. Then there's the support troop. Now, the support troop had 1 Dingo, 3 half tracks, and 18 dismounts. More caveats, especially on the number of dismounts, we'll cover that at the end as well. Half tracks, most likely were M5 half tracks, I guess you could say. Then there's the admin troop, nothing really exciting here. 1 water cart, I'm assuming that was like a Bowser trailer. However, it could have also been a water tanker truck, possibly. There's also 7 3-ton trucks and a motorcycle. Last but not least, this squadron headquarters, which had 4 Staghound armoured cars, 1 Dingo scout car, 1 Jeep, 1 staff car, 1 white scout car, which was used as an ambulance, and 5 motorcycles. Now, Staghounds were quite common in British armoured car headquarters. The reason being was they were bigger, therefore they weren't really so suitable to go at the front line inside the Sabres, but because they're bigger, they also were a lot more roomy and therefore were more suitable for headquarters. There was a lot more, but you could have a lot more command ability in there, additional radios, additional mapping, and other things like that. So overall, the Sabre Squadron had 10 Daimler armoured cars, 13 Dingo scout cars, 2 Matador armoured cars, 4 Staghound armoured cars, 3 half tracks, 7 lorries, 1 white scout car, 1 Jeep, 1 staff car, and 6 motorcycles. And there were 4 of these Sabre squadrons. So you can already start multiplying these numbers up. But to give you an idea of the number of vehicles, or what it would look like for a Sabre squadron, this is all of the vehicles that we've just discussed. So this is just one Sabre squadron. So you have the 5 Sabres, the heavy troop, the headquarters troop, the admin troop, and the support troop, all there. And that's all the vehicles. And it's a lot of vehicles, I guess you could say. Now, going on to the caveats. The number of AEC Matadors in each troop is kind of open to debate. The reason being is the tables available at the National Archives list that the regiment should be assigned a total number of 8 AEC Matadors. This kind of matches up with the generic Armoured Car Regiment table. And based on the allotment tables of how many vehicles were allotted to or counted in June 44 and October 44 also reflects these 8 AEC Matadors. However, the Inns of Court regimental history says that they had 3 AEC Matadors in each heavy troop, which would mean they would have a total number of 12 AEC Matadors. So that means there are 4 of these Matadors not mentioned, I guess you could say, in the tables in June 44 and October 44. Now, I have some of my own theories as to why there might be this discrepancy, and to be honest, there are maybe a couple of different arguments for this, and I think it's something to save maybe for a later date once we have a bit more context on the squadron's reorganisations. The second caveat is a number of dismounted troops in the support blitz troop. Now, the number that I've gone for represented is based off of the very limited information that I've been able to find, and that is based off the generic organisation charts for the armoured car regiments from June 44. The reason being is the support troops don't really get much of a mention in the regiment history or the war diaries, I guess you could say. So we never quite really know how many men are resport. We know the support troops exist, we know they actually do some work, but we don't really know how many ranks or numbers of soldiers are actually in these support troops. But based off of the generic organisation chart, there should be 1 officer, 1 NCO, and 18 other ranks with 1 Bren in total. So most of them would have been rifles and maybe some Stens in there as well. Now, when it comes to other ranks, that does include Lance Sergeants, Lance Corporals, Corporals, and Soldiers. So it does mean you have your junior NCOs in there as well. So you've probably got 1 Lieutenant, 1 Sergeant as the NCO, and then with the 18 others, you've probably got probably 3 Corporals in there, and the rest of them would be privates, I guess you could say. Now, for this presentation, the references are shown here. References will also be down in the description should you want to check out some of the websites. The top 2 websites are quite useful, and the top one is a website article, but that article has also been used in an armoured car journal article from 1996. It's almost like it's basically that 1996 article has just been revamped and put on a website format, I guess you can say, and that one does reference the National Archives, which is actually quite interesting. These one in the middle, that's got the generic armoured car regiment organisation chart, which I think is still useful because that's what the plan was. However, plans change, and we'll be covering that in future videos. And then last but not least, we have the Devil's Own. That's basically the Inns of Court regiment history, and it is a very good book. It can be hard to get hold of, I believe, though. But that's all the references. Now, the next video, I guess you could say, on this matter will be when the regiment start their engagements, when they learn those lessons that C Squadron has transferred to the rest of the regiment, and they then take that on board. And that's when things start to get interesting. Well, see you next time.